Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here at the National Constitution Center with each of you and participating in this very important national symposium of First Amendment voice. I'm asking Steve to stay with me here for a moment, and I'm going to ask Larry Rosenberg to join me on the stage for a special presentation before I give a few remarks to introduce this panel.
So before we start the next panel, we wanted to take a few minutes to honor Steve Miska, our wonderful executive director. Steve, as some of you may know, has had a tremendous history of service in the military, and since then, Steve, when he wants to do something, puts his all into it. As the last panel said, put 100% or more, and Steve does that. It reminds me of a comment by that great sage of knowledge, Groucho Marx. I would never want to join a club that would have me as a member. And thinking about that, Steve decided to start his own club with Global Peace Foundation support, and First Amendment Voice has come out of that. And we owe just a tremendous debt of gratitude to Steve. Because of his tremendous commitment to service, Steve has been asked to go back into a service at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and Steve will be leaving First Amendment Voice in the relatively near future to do that. And it's only because of a tremendous commitment that he has to veterans and to the veteran community, and because of the importance of the mission that he's going to undertake. And so we wanted to give him an award for his tremendous service to First Amendment Voice. We really wouldn't exist as an organization without him, and we thank you so much.
Thank you. We should probably throw them over with I'll get in the middle. So anyway, anybody got it? Cell phone. Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
Dance routine? No. Okay.
So I do want to add a few words to that. We're having this important discussion at a very important time in our nation's history, and here First Amendment Voice is leading this way. Steve mentioned that this is the 7th symposium. So a good number of years ago, out of concern for the challenges first facing our nation, then we began working with Steve. Global Peace Foundation incubated what became First Amendment Voice. And I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues at Global Peace Foundation that we have greatly appreciated Steve's commitment, his leadership, his dedication to the nation and to our people to live up to our founding ideals. And so we're very proud of the work that has been established with First Amendment Voice, and I think this work, Steve is going to serve the nation in a much larger way, but we will carry on this work, support this work, all of us together, because we the citizens have a lot of work to do to protect our freedoms. The First Amendment Voice tagline, if you will, of citizenship is not a spectator sport reminds me also of an earlier one that Steve used about owning your liberty. And so we do know that the First Amendment guarantees our most important rights as citizens. And so the work of First Amendment Voice is extremely important. I find it interesting that the actual First Amendment is very, very concise. It really struck me as interesting that there are only 45 words in the entirety of the First Amendment. And yet that First Amendment guarantees our most fundamental rights, 5 of them: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to the right of assembly, and the freedom to petition to the redress of grievances to our government. Very fundamental freedoms. What's also interesting is the First Amendment is about what the government must not do, right? It doesn't speak to what the citizens should do. And that's why organizations like First Amendment Voice are so important. Because if we own our liberty, and if we realize that citizenship in a country that seeks to be genuinely an inclusive society of free people, then our participation is needed always. The one final couple of points I want to make is when I always have an opportunity to be here at the National Constitution Center, I'm reminded how auspicious this stage is and this place is because of how auspicious that history is. And what was founded more than 2 centuries ago was an experiment, as the theme of this symposium notes. And that experiment is a work in progress, always a work in progress. And each generation and each era faces new challenges, but also new opportunities. And it is incumbent on us to engage and to work together to make a more perfect union. I thought it was extremely fitting that the beginning of today's forum began with President George Washington's farewell address, excerpts from that, very poignantly reminding us that he worried about this union and would this union survive. I thought it was also very touching and meaningful that we heard from another general today speaking to the issues that face us in this nation, and likewise the challenge for us to work together to realize our founding ideals and lift up the better elements of ourself. And so the Constitution offers an extremely important frame. I firmly believe that the Declaration of Independence provides the vision statement for this nation, especially in its second paragraph, where it explains, or where it affirms, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. And so what the government must not do is to interfere with those fundamental rights endowed to each and every human being by the Creator, God. And so it is also, I think, fitting and important that in the First Amendment, the first 16 words of the 45 deal with freedom of religion. And so that's the topic of this panel and this discussion. And it's also interesting to me that the word conscience is not in the First Amendment, but it's our conviction actually that the first freedom is freedom of conscience and religion, right? Because most fundamentally, the most important freedom is within each and every one of us. The choices we make, the decisions we make, and that is most fundamentally about our conscience. And so this discussion, I believe today is very important. I really appreciate that this symposium is also connecting with and focusing in on the important contributions that our veterans have made, not only through their service to the nation, but their ongoing service, and that they can be a critical part as we join together in working to uplift our nation and to focus in on what we the people can and must do so that our nation and our freedoms can be preserved. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion led by Dr. Murray.
Thank you very much, Jim. And this being the last panel, I figure we can make this a little more interactive. So each of our speakers will run out to the audience, grab one of you, and do a little hokey dokey, come back up here, and we'll do something else, right? Keep you all energized. But in all seriousness, it's good to wrap up this afternoon's session to talk about something that when it comes to religious freedom, and I was glad to hear on the last panel talking about how do you live your faith. And I think one of the most important things, especially with the Global Peace Foundation, and I see with First Amendment Voice Alliance, is that we don't choose a religion, and as Jim had mentioned, it's freedom of religion, belief, and conscience. So we engage with folks that serve a God or serve no God at all, but that space in the public square is open to all people, and we need to make sure that that space is open to everybody in the public square. So whether you serve, have a faith tradition that you hold to or not is not the issue. The issue is that it's protected. And I think, and what's really makes this symposium really unique this year is the focus that we have on military. You know, all Americans who wear or have worn a military uniform should have the same freedoms that they defend. And that's what we're talking about here today, because they sacrificed their lives so that we can have these freedoms here today. And so when we talk about religious freedom, an active military person or a veteran, how are they treated because of their faith? Are there any things that hold them back, or that where government encroaches on their rights as a chaplain or as an active military person? There are all kinds of stories that are out there on where you see this infringement. And so we want to make sure that those are protected. And so having this kind of conversation this afternoon, I'm glad to have three unique panelists with us today. And what's exciting about this group here is that they really come from diverse backgrounds. At the very end, I have Reverend Dr. Nathan Walker. He's president of the 1791 Delegates. So good to have you with us. Then we have Simran Stupanagel, who is the president of Sikh Forb, and also serves as vice chairman for the International Religious Freedom Secretariat with us, representing the Sikh community. And then we have Teal Ellington, who serves the American Muslim Veterans. Thank you. Thank you. I know I was going to get it right some way, but I figured I'd just let you do it. So it's really good to have this different kind of perspectives from each place. So what I'd like to do is have each of you do a little introduction of yourself. I was going to read everyone's bios, but I liked what Larry did with his group, and let you each share a little bit about yourself, and then talk about military and religious freedom and where that stands for you. And then we'll do some Q&A and then wrap up. So let me start with you, Teal. Thank you.
Let me greet everyone with Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Thanks for the opportunity to come here. The First Amendment is all our inherent rights, no matter what. A little bit about myself. I go to Masjid Muhammad here in Philadelphia. Also, I have the distinct opportunity to serve the military while I was not a Muslim. And I feel as though the religious freedoms there and the First Amendment was upheld because you had to go to church every Sunday. And that was your opportunity to get out of work when you go here. But I took my Shahada in 2007, so I'm getting to see there is no difference of how we treat it. And I, just by talking to you and studying the Quran, I think the forefathers had the Quran in hand, because the Bill of Rights, the first Constitution, is set the groundwork for everything. And then when I look at the Quran and I see in the Quran freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom, inherent rights. So with that in mind, we look at the Quran, we look at the Constitution, and you look at the Uniform Military Justice Code. Those are the standards of reality, mankind, and the universe. I retired from the military in 2003, and then I retired from civilian life in 2008. So it's been a blessed part to see how working with the government, I know panels before, they talked about from military to the government. So I did 30 years in the government, but I did reserves simultaneous with 2 activation with Desert Storm and Noble Eagle. So I got the opportunity to do stateside activation or not. But if I would have stayed in the military as a first sergeant, I know it was no doubt. 6 months later, after we did our tour, coming back from Fort Leonard Wood, we were activated to go overseas. So my opportunity to get a ribbon for overseas stopped right there. But I work in Philadelphia, or I say work because it seems like it's work. When you retire, you never retire. As I work with Master Muhammad, we do a lot with the feeding. We do a lot with women in shelters. So aspect of treating people with humanity is nothing but the Constitution and First Amendment. And as I go along working around the cities and going to state, it's just the service. And we talked about all day long is the service. But nobody really understands the Constitution or the Bill of Rights until they get in trouble. When they get in trouble or you feel as though your needs and your morals and your values are being upset, then you start going into the Quran. Then you start going into the Constitution. Then you start going to Uniform Military Justice Code to find out, is the government really treating me right? So it's all about educating yourself. And I look back, when you talk about freedom of speech, I look back at, even though Muhammad Ali wasn't in the service, his First Amendment is freedom of speech, all right? And then in the Quran, we have something called there's no compulsion in Islam, and that's freedom of speech as you go around and you detail everything in Islam. But the most important thing is how you treat each other. We lost that. The whole world lost that. But if we can go back and look at the constitutional right and whatever our religious bases are and put them on that level, a lot of this stuff that's happening in the community will stop. Because I feel as though Islam is peace. Most people say, oh, and it's a stereotype. And it shouldn't be a stereotype because I don't fit none of the stereotypes. But if you look at me, I fit all the categories in life in the United States. A woman, a black woman, a Muslim. You can't go wrong with that. You definitely can't go wrong. And in our religion, the women is held at the same big status in Islam. So you can't deny us. And I know you just heard a story about the sister that just got killed for her covering. That wasn't Islam. That was basically people cultural. Yeah. So when you look at religion and you look at Islam and you look at the First Amendment, you got to make it not cultural. You got to keep it in the standards of governing, ruling over it. And just looking at the First Amendment, it just opened my eyes and renew everything in me that we can get better in all our regulations, all our stereotypes, all our moral values, if we just go back to the Constitution of the Bill of Rights. Treat you right, you can speak. Whether we disagree or not, we should have a common goal to say, we understand, but I'm not just going to go ahead and shoot you or kill you because you don't understand. If you have the basic right, and you know the press has it too, it's in the Bill of Rights, the press. We can't have that propaganda. We got to know. I know Mo say, I don't want to look at 6, Fox, or whatever. It's the hardcore, because in the Quran, it say, we taught you not what you know not. And we heard that already about the major. You know not, but you know. But do you want to carry out everything you do? From that aspect, we got to move forward. If we get more people in, and like with the voting right, in Islam is a lot of people, a lot of Muslims say they don't want to vote. But in every culture, every aspect, every battle, every type or organization, there is a vote. So with your vote, even though you don't win the vote, you have that right to express that vote, and you pick for that person. And as we go on and we see that Islam set the standards for us to get out, vote, treat people with humanity and everything. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that's not fair because you get to count all those and I can't. So how do you work around that?
Women is the balance of society, no matter which way you leave it. That's why I sat here first.
That's right. Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Walker, I'd like to turn it over to you next.
Well, they say that the greatest gift we can give one another is to be in one another's presence. And it's truly an honor to be in your presence, especially as we gather in such interesting and difficult times. When I think of the pandemic, I think of the weight of the world really falling on the shoulders of families. Really, it was families and young families who all of a sudden had to work at home, school at home, do everything, and there is tremendous pressure. I myself don't have children, but I'm very empathetic to the families who had to carry us through this pandemic to this stage. And military families in particular had an additional, I was about to say burden, but I don't think that is how militaries frame it. It's not a burden, it's a responsibility, and it's a duty, and it's a calling. And so, as someone who is not a member of the military, as someone who is not a parent, I thank you for your service. Thank you for how you are tending to your families in these very difficult times. So with that said, just before the pandemic, I had the tremendous blessing, really, to be able to craft a curriculum for 8-year-olds in the Cub Scouts. And they were in Manhattan, so from all the different boroughs of New York City, they gathered first in Manhattan and then over at a retreat center. And we had the opportunity through our organization, 1791 delegates named after the year the Bill of Rights was ratified, and the Foundation for Religious Literacy, to train these 8-year-olds how to learn about the First Amendment. How do you teach kids about the 5 freedoms? Well, we did so by putting it in language called the 3 R's: rights, responsibility, and respect. Everybody has rights. Everybody has a responsibility to protect the rights of others, including those with whom you disagree, and to do so respectfully. Rights, responsibility, and respect. And the reason we were doing this training for these Cub Scouts was because we were creating a patch for them to earn so that they could take it to their teachers in their public schools and hold up their 3 R's patch and say, I'm here to stop religious-based bullying in our school. I am a 3 R's ambassador, and I'm here to promote rights, responsibility, respect. When they went through their initiation ceremony and they were chanting out the 3 R's and they were getting their patches, it was one of the most inspiring things that I've seen in teaching people before. They were so fired up and they were so committed to defend the rights of people other than themselves. Why were we doing this? Because we know through the social hostilities and the increases in violence in America today that religious minorities are experiencing an all-time level of hate crimes. Right? Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, are those perceived to be any one of those are being targeted because of their faith. Their communities are at risk. And through those increases in social hostilities and violence, we felt compelled to counter the illiteracy about religion that breeds such violence, to equip these particular 8-year-olds to take it head on. Why the public schools? Because Muslim families were reporting, 42% of Muslim families were reporting that their children were being bullied in schools. That is double that of Jews and Protestants. This was at an all-time high of religious-based bullying in public schools. Here's the most tragic statistic about that. 1 in 4 of the bullies were the teachers. They were the school administrators. So when all of a sudden, this 8-year-old comes into the classroom and holds up to the teacher, I'm a 3 R's ambassador, all of a sudden, the student becomes a teacher to the teacher and sets a standard right there in that classroom. That type of empowerment is really essential, and it's something that's lacking right now. And I feel like that type of empowerment, that type of work is something in the DNA of military families. There's a constant commitment to defend the rights of people other than oneself. So it's in this context, if you look at schools and the increased social hostilities and in the political rhetoric and so on, you see some of these trends bleed into the courts. So I'm a minister. I've spent 14 years serving congregations. I'm also a First Amendment educator, a nerd who got my doctorate in First Amendment law. And when I look at the court cases, the results of them, I see these very disturbing trends. Less than 4% of the First Amendment free exercise cases before the courts come from white Protestants. They win 70% of their cases.
Wow.
If you are Native American, Jewish, or Catholic, you bring 30% of the cases, but you only win about 40-ish% of the time. If you're Muslim, you bring far more cases, and you win a third of the time, 33% of the time. I'm saying this because the biases that are infiltrating the school, leading our children to be bullied because of their identities, that's infiltrating the politics and the religious rhetoric, feeding this fear of the suspect minority of the day, is infiltrating into the courts so that it's not a blind and just system, but it's fueled with the same discriminatory ideas that we're seeing in different sectors of society. And this, to me, all comes down to a type of illiteracy, an illiteracy about religion and an illiteracy about the law. So the first thing that comes out of this illiteracy is a lack of understanding of our history. Right now, there are 1% of the American population consists of Muslims. What was the population of Muslims at the founding of the country? 5 times more that. There are 5% of the American population at the founding of the country identified as Muslim. 5 times more than today. There has never been an America without Islam. Never. Where did they come from? A vast majority came from indentured slavery. Through the slave trade being brought to the Americas by force, and then through that force being forced to convert to Christianity of different denominations. Others at the founding of the country identified as Muslims who were diplomats, who were working with John Adams, who he himself in a treaty on behalf of the United States Senate that unanimously adopted the treaty, said that there's no character of enmity against any Muslim majority country. Washington, Madison, Jefferson, on and on and on, framers explicitly included Muslims in the First Amendment rhetoric around free exercise of religion, explicitly named Mohammedans and Islamists as ones who were protected by the Constitution. And that history is missing. Because if you were to look at our politics of the day, you would think that somehow Islam is foreign to this nation when it is not. So that illiteracy about our law, about religions, and about history is fueling the divisions that we're seeing today. One of those forms of illiteracy is about the fact of the racial demographics that tie to the illiteracies that I'm speaking about. George Washington, in one of his first acts, signed into law the naturalization law that said that in order to be a citizen of the United States, you had to be a free white person. It took a civil war to take out the word free. A civil war to take out the word free. And through the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments, we get a new form of reconstruction of the U.S. Constitution, ensuring equal protection under the law, ensuring that if you are born here, you can be a citizen. But it wasn't until Kennedy's vision of a new immigration system, which he did not get to see, because it was his assassination that led Johnson to formally reform that immigration system, that took out the requirement to be white, to be a citizen. I was born in 1975. I'm of the first generation of Americans to live in America where race was not a prerequisite for citizenship. The first generation in American history to not require race as a prerequisite, a legal prerequisite for citizenship. When that changed, a new generation started to see possibilities that Bhagat Singh Thind did not even get to see in 1920 when he came back from serving America in World War I, a turban-wearing Indian Sikh who came before the U.S. Supreme Court and said, I just served America in war, and when I came back, I'm being told that my citizenship is being revoked. They said, oh, but you're Indian, you're not white, you can't be a citizen. I just served America in war, and I am not seen as dutiful to this country. He said, but you're not white to the common man. That was literally the phrase they used. He said, I am from the Caucasus of India, where the term Caucasian comes from. They said, oh, but to the common man, you are not white. His citizenship was revoked and upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. Fast forward from there in the 1920s to this new vision that Kennedy casted and Johnson enacted. We get this whole new racial equity when it comes to citizenship. That in itself has fundamentally changed the religious demographics of the United States. And I do think that a lot of the religious liberty conflicts that we are seeing in society today have to do with this unrest still around race that ties into our identities as religious or not. And it is in this context that I feel that the military has a very profound duty to do what it has done throughout human history, through many different civilizations, and particularly in the United States. And that is to show us the way forward. What do we know about the military as an institution in the United States? It was leading desegregation efforts, creating an integrated system beyond the racial categories that you were seeing in civil society. When it came to reform with women and gays, you begin to see different social reforms taking place in the military. Imagine if we did that with religious liberty in the military. There are 2,900 military chaplains. There are only 14 that are Muslim. There are 6,000 Muslim military personnel. They deserve spiritual care. They deserve a country, a military that will serve them in their most vulnerable times of their vocation and in their lives. Especially in a time like this, when the whole weight of the world has been on families, and even more so on military families. So I want to close by going back to those 8-year-old kids that I met just before the pandemic. Cub Scouts. Having this deep loyalty and commitment to defend the rights of people other than themselves, to prevent religious-based bullying in their elementary schools. When I saw the light behind their eyes and their deep commitment to that work, I saw the spirit of America. I saw the spirit of the First Amendment in action. I saw that liberty of conscience. And now that I'm reflecting on that in this state of where we are in this pandemic, I am now coming to a different definition of liberty. For my entire career, I have seen liberty as an individual pursuit. Like I'm a Article 18 guy, and this is of the Article 18 of the Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that does affirm freedom of conscience, not just of freedom of religion or belief, but conscience. And I see that as a fundamental right, inalienable right, that is afforded to all human beings across the world, across all generations, across all civilizations. And because I've been in this world of First Amendment, I've always looked to the individual to be an agent of that conscience. But what I'm learning from the pandemic is that I'm beginning to shift my understanding of liberty from an individual pursuit to one of a collective. And what I mean by that is I want to raise liberty to the power of two, where I not only seek liberty for myself as an openly gay man who is married to an immigrant who comes from a Hindu family. I am not seeking to have a self-centered form of liberty. I am dedicating my life to ensure that right of conscience for that white evangelical baker, for the Muslim military chaplain, for that 8-year-old Cub Scout who's carrying her patch to her public school. And in that way, I'm defining liberty not as independence, but as interdependence. Why? Because your freedoms are intimately tied to my own. And I am not free until you are free. What can be more American than that? I am not free until you are free. It is an honor to be in your presence.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walker. Amen. You know, Dr. Walker, what you mentioned, I've heard Simran Stupanagel mention many times representing the Sikh communities, the Sikh community. So Simran, why don't you share a little bit about your background and the work that you do and the impact for religious freedom with military and veterans?
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be on this auspicious stage, and these are incredibly difficult acts to follow. I was hoping you'd say something stupid so that I could kind of come in strong, but that was nothing less than divine, and so many parallels to my life, as you might be able to imagine. Now, my daughters are, on their mother's side, are from a Mayflower family. I myself am born in Germany and grew up in Asia, and moved here. So I have a couple of perspectives on what it means, what a blessing it is to be an American and to live in this society under this Constitution, and the duties and the rights that brings. First of all, when I was a kid in school in Germany, I was born in Germany. You were born in Germany? I don't know if I should congratulate you or console you, but a teacher came in, a substitute teacher, and took my turban right off my head, and said, "What's that doing in my class?" And that poor teacher had 25 angry German kids to deal with, who all rose to my defense. We're like cats and dogs with each other, but that teacher, boy oh boy, that resulted in an apology in front of half the school and all kinds of drama. But I do remember, as a German kid, the Nazi generation was still about in their 60s then. They kind of just of retirement age. And I knew there was something weird about older people. They seemed more angry, more closed up. They'd send my friends, if somebody's grandma saw me with my friend, they'd say, get out of here. You don't belong here. But I'm Caucasian, actually come from an old German military family. Now, I also knew that I was a Sikh, though, and I started saying to these people, I'm German. This is what we look like now. And it would destroy them right in front of my eyes. And at first, that gave me a sense of power, but then it made me sad. I didn't understand the confusion. Now, I also knew that my first name was Johannes, which is John the Baptist. And Simran was my middle name because the German government at the time wouldn't give a Sikh kid a first name if that kid is Caucasian because that wasn't German enough. I also knew that when I turned 18, there was mandatory military service that I was excluded from because of the way I looked. I also knew that when I married an American and moved to the US, I couldn't serve here either. Because even though we had veterans, American Sikhs in World War I Army uniform, even though hundreds of thousands died or were injured liberating Europe from the Nazis, fighting against parts of my family, actually. Starting with the Reagan administration, we couldn't serve. And that was painful. Now, in the UK, that was different. In the UK, we enjoyed some respect in the armed forces. That's changed now. But I remember talking to a group. Now, I spent about 15 years working for a very large military contractor. It's the head of corporate strategy in Washington. It was the VA's Employer of Veterans of the Year for several years, largest employer of retired American police officers. And I knew that if I wanted to engage a general or a senior police officer or senior civil servant to talk about security or military contracts, I needed to first lay right on the table why I was an American, why I was a good American. So I really had to if I wanted to even get a meeting or get a word in, I had to be very good at defining what it means to be American. One of the first things I can say about that is when I see a veteran and I say, thank you for your service, even though I wasn't allowed to serve, I know you put your life on the line. And what might be even harder than that is risking your time with your family. Either you're deployed or you put your life at risk. You have children that might have lost their mother or father. You didn't see them grow up the same way others did. You did that for my First Amendment right. You did that for my right to be here as a Sikh. So that's what's in my heart, is when I say thank you for your service, I thank you for protecting my First Amendment rights. I wish I'd been able to serve as well. I flew from Paris to London to DC once, and I get to have a little fun with this now. In Paris, they had the French Revolution, and they just killed the clergy and the royals right there, and they still sing the praises of those glorious days. The security officer, some of our contracts were security contracts at large U.S. airports where the TSA's work. The security officer said, take that off and put it in the metal detector, or not in the metal detector, in the X-ray machine. And I said, no, you just have to, wave a wand. And the security guard stepped forward, which, is a threat, and said, put it in. And I said, well, no, I know my rights under the European Union. By now, I'm pretty versed in this stuff. I said, no, why don't you get your supervisor? And they're like, oh, damn. And when I got their supervisor, I'm not supposed to say that, Paul. No, you're bishop, but I said it. That's right. I'm sorry.
I go to my supervisor, too.
I apologize to him. That security officer ended up getting in trouble, which would be the standard under the European Union usually. Went to London. The screener was a Sikh, and he was like, hey. I was like, hey, what's up? He was like, I'm gonna screen all your stuff. I was like, that's cool. Screen all my stuff. Turban stays on, I get to Dulles, D.C., and the immigration officer looks at my passport, my green card, looks at me, he's trying to figure out what to say, and he goes, "Sir, do you intend to harm this country in any way?" And I said, "How dare you? How dare you, buddy? Because guess what I do for a living? I work for one of the largest security firms in the country, and we protect airports. In fact, you're looking at a Sikh, and we love this country. We love this country and love the First Amendment." And that's all it took for him to go, "Guess what? I'm so sorry, A, B, don't tell anybody, but I'm going on a top secret deployment to Afghanistan next month. So you and I were on the same team." That's America. You have to educate each other, just like what you're saying. And then we can get along pretty quickly. We have a two-party political system, which is tough. As a European, that's tough, because we have 5 political opinions. We form coalition governments. We have 5 crazy uncles and aunts who talk about whatever they talk about, and everyone's kind of tolerated at Christmas dinner. But here you have 2. And we love the either or. I mean, how can this country be divided along political demographies on virtually every political opinion? You're either one of these or one of those. The common ground is so massive. My favorite, I said this yesterday, one of my favorite videos in the world is where the MAGA marchers met the Black Lives Matter marchers. They started yelling at each other. They realized they're both talking about individual liberties. They realized they both wanted equal access to opportunity, equal treatment before the law, and they started marching together. That is all possible here in this country. And I'm saying that from from the vantage point of somebody who wears a turban every single day and experiences that firsthand. It doesn't matter which side of the issue you're on. If we find common ground, we'll be here together. And the key to that, and this is the work we do at the Religious Freedom Secretariat, is to fight for each other. Many of our religious groups and special interest groups, we're good at fighting for our own issues. If you're in an LGBTQ rights organization, that's what you fight for. If you're in a certain religious group, that's what you fight for. Until we fight for each other, though, that is a difficult path. It's what the Nazis did. They isolated people from each other, then they took them out one by one. If at the beginning of that process they had stood up for each other, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. That would have never happened. That would have never happened. We have to do it for each other. I want to give you an example of what happened in Guatemala. We opened at the IRF Secretariat, we opened the first ever interfaith event in Guatemala. And they look at America as a beacon. A lot of places do. But they really do. And they said, we need religious freedom like the United States has it. They'll block migrants from going further north to the U.S. border. They'll stop them right there in Guatemala. That's how passionate they are about it. And I remember saying, not so fast, do you remember that the great state of Missouri had an extermination order against the Mormons in the 19th century? Mormons had the choice of leaving or being executed, exterminated. It's not part of our history that's talked about so often. Our religious freedom is precious and needs to be protected every day. I know these 3 will be here. If there's a Sikh in trouble, these 3 will be there the next day. There's plenty of trouble for Sikhs. There's plenty of trouble for all of us. Each one of our religious communities is persecuted somewhere in vicious ways, if not somewhere in the country, somewhere in the world. It's our job to go to the weakest among us, even if we don't particularly like them or agree with their ideology, and protect their First Amendment rights. For Sikhs, you have the Taliban, bombed the Sikh Gurdwara, the temple in Kabul. There was a wedding, and then they bombed the funeral procession right after. A couple months later, you're here in the U.S. There's a shooting at the FedEx Center in Indianapolis. Sikhs got targeted and killed. But in each one of those places, we have allies. And I especially want to thank those of you who worked to get minorities out of Afghanistan after the U.S. withdrawal. There's people who supported our military efforts there who we need to get out. There's Christians there who we need to get out. try being gay in Afghanistan these days. We need to get them out. Try being a Sikh, try being a Hazara. There's an act of genocide against the Hazara communities. Could any of us say, no, we need to get this one group out? And we need to get all of them out. Sure, you may focus on a group first, but if you do, focus on the adjacent groups too and do it together. The amount of goodwill is for Afghanistan's communities is humbling and touching. We need to do more. We need to then welcome them here when they arrive and integrate them. And again, protect one another during that process. It's the only way. It's the only way I've seen work. Back to Guatemala, I said that about the extermination order against the Mormons, and a gentleman stood up after and he said, I don't really know what a Sikh is. By the way, we're the 5th largest religion in the world, 30,000 temples, mostly in India. I don't really know who they are, but we just want to thank you. And if any of us, or what I'd said is if anybody messes with the Mormons in Guatemala, the Sikhs will be there to protect them. He said, if anybody messes with any of you, the Mormons will be there to protect you. And then the chief rabbi of Guatemala stood up and said, Shalom means peace. And we're here to protect all of you. This is Jews saying this to a room full of Catholics, evangelicals, massive religions. It's a small group. I remember the Ahmadiyya Muslims who were there, persecuted in their own country. They realized they had protection. They made friends all around, except that they weren't getting persecuted there. But they realized they had so much support. And then Pastor Cash Luna was in tears. He was he has the largest church in Latin America. He was in tears because, his heart opened, and he realized that everybody felt what he was feeling, that we're all in this together. That's all I really want to say for now. I'm an advisor to the Sikh American Veterans Alliance, SAVA, and to the Defense Sikh Network in the UK. And I'd love to work with any of you on these initiatives. Who you are and what you stand for is humbling and touching. And how lovely is it to get into a room and realize you have so many friends who you've never met, who have the same heart and the same spirit. So I do have a lot of hope. And thank you for your incredible work.
Thank you very much, Simran. Appreciate that. As we get ready to close this out, if there's any questions, if you would stand up, that would be great. One of the things I want to remind us all is that, the theme for this year's symposium is the American experiment at risk. And when we look at our nation where we are today, and we understand the foundational principles of our nation, it is still an experiment that is ongoing. Yes, I think it was yesterday I was looking, I was never part of the active military. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And yesterday they did the celebration of when John F. Kennedy signed in 1961 for the Peace Corps to be enacted. And when I looked at the picture in the White House, I looked at it and I was looking at it, I'm like, wow, all white men in the White House, and there was one white woman in the corner. And I said, the reason why America is still an experiment is because as we have grown as a nation, so have we as a diverse people. I mean, look at this platform today, the diversity up here amongst us, that come from different cultures, different backgrounds, different ideologies. But we all can sit here on this stage and be in alignment and agreement when it comes to our First Amendment principles. And I think that's the most coveted piece that we have here, and we must protect that. Those of you that are in military, when you served in military, Steve, I think of you. Have you, as a person in military, have you ever said, I'm an active military person, but when I come home, I take that off? Do you ever say that? Teal, did you ever say that? No, because that's a part of, as an American in the military, that's a part of who we are. So it is in the faith community. And so often what we find, even in military and the faith community, is that we're being required by government and other institutions that say you have to take that off when you come in here. You can't live your faith as a school teacher. You can't, even as a chaplain in the military, you know, they want to control how you minister as a chaplain. And understanding some of the statistics that you gave, you can understand the diversity within our military and how diverse it is, yet how do we meet the needs? So what the military said is, let's not have you focus on the faith tradition you come from. Just remember, your requirement is to serve everyone. So therefore, they start saying you have to be careful on how you present your faith, or really don't present your faith, but be there accountable to everybody else. So then all of a sudden that brings that whole experiment into a dichotomy of how do we work this? How do I work as a Christian pastor, working with different faith communities and not being able to say amen or thank you, Jesus? You know, so we look at all of this, and I think we have to understand, and it always boils right down to, and that's the work that I love with the Global Peace Foundation, and Jim as our international president, is that in the public square, that is the protected space. And that's for everybody that's in that space, and we have to be very respectful to everyone that comes to that space, and that it's not pushing one agenda or another, but making that the space where community can build together, and doing like Simran said, if anybody messes with a Sikh, you're going to find the Christians and Muslims backing them, and vice versa, and I think that's really important. Any questions as we wrap up? Because I want to get ready to turn it over to Steve, because I know we have a hard close at 4:45, so we've got 5 minutes left. Any questions or comments? Yes.
I don't want to take up too much time.
Sure.
My name is Chris Purdy, Veterans for American Deals. I have a very challenging question. I'm going to stumble to get it out, and so I hope you bear with me. This was a fantastic panel. I was really grateful to listen to all this. One of the things that I thought coming into this panel, given the religious freedom and veterans discussions that's been happening over the past few years, is COVID and COVID vaccines. And so I am just curious, and again, this is a very challenging question for me to get out, but at what point, so, you know, we know that there were many service members who refused vaccines for religious purposes. And I'm curious people's thoughts on at what point, you know, that religious freedom, when that conflicts with what is perceived as the common good, where is that balance there? And I would just love to hear y'all's thoughts on that.
That's a very good question. That's a $6 million question. If we had that answer, we could have solved a lot of the issues over the past couple of years. But let me turn it over to Teal. Why don't you get first?
Assalamu alaikum to you all again. That's a very topic in Islam about taking the vaccine. You have a lot of us who won't take the vaccine because you don't know what's in it, what's the effects of it. Even though we have doctors to tell us, there's still going to be that fine line where you're not going to take it. In Islam, we have that same mentality. So I know the military from that standpoint, and I wasn't in the military when that came up, but I'm just speaking as a civilian or a veteran, that you're always going to have that underlying when you're not going to take it. Then the military or your job or your organization say, you either take it or lose your job. And then your religious beliefs come in and say, do I want to lose my job and give it all to God? So Islamically, that's how we think. Why should I take it? How will it affect me later? Or is it propaganda? But we know so many people have passed away with COVID, but still we look at our religious faith to see whether is it good for me, what's in effect. And then you have all the other experiments that happen that where people say this was something that man made, or they planned it, or they erased something. But to be the educated guest, everybody look to their religion and see what that basis is for them to take it. There's no yes, no answer, because if the government say you can't come in, you can't come in with a mask. You're not going to put a mask on, right? You're going to put a mask on if you got to go to the store. And we learned that we can work through everything and deal with the different situation But when you go to Islam, we look at the faith base and what's the effect on us if it's something that we don't believe in, that we can't take in our bodies.
Dr. Walker?
I believe exemptions for rights of conscience create a kind of pressure valve for society where it allows some breathing space. So if you look at why specifically racial minority communities in America were hesitant around the vaccine, it was around the history of government abuse of black bodies, literally, of military bodies being used for medical experiments. I mean, without knowledge of that history and then introducing a kind of coercive act, it re-traumatized generations of communities who didn't have that pressure valve or even just fundamental freedoms. And so, to me, when I look at rights of conscience, I look at the ability to give someone a space to lament, to challenge, to question. And when Rutgers University did that, for instance, it has I think it's something like 30,000 students. And they had, as a state university, had that question of like, okay, should we have different exemptions? And they agreed they should have medical exemptions, and they thought, well, maybe we can have philosophical objections, but how do we do that? And what about religious? How do we manage these three? When it came down to it, when they awarded a fair process for students and faculty to go through that, it ended up that of the 30,000 that were required to come to school vaccinated and masked, it was less than like 120 that actually exercised those exemptions. So if you craft a vision of a government that's non-coercive, that creates exemptions, gives people space to breathe, you'll fundamentally honor a core thing about religion, which is that religions are dynamic. They're internally diverse. They change over time. These are our three premises articulated by by Diane Moore at Harvard University and the American Academy of Religion. Internal diversity. Religions change over time. They're embedded in all aspects of culture. You can't just check your identity at the door.
Right.
And so for me, I believe that these exemptions are very critical for the health of society, the civic health of society, and very, very real. It can be a public health opportunity as well. Because if you give people a fair process to exercise their liberty of conscience, you see that it may not be as dramatic as Twitter might suggest.
Simran, as we close up, did you want to add any final comment to that?
I think those were brilliant words. In the Southwest, we had, the issue of casinos being able to open, but not churches. So I think especially as societal pressure mounts so viciously to be vaccinated, it's important for people to be protected in their own conscience. Obviously, government overreach is a major issue. Obviously, the fear of a pandemic is real. Sikhs tend to be pro-vaccination, but I would say it is absolutely critical for us to protect a vocal minority in their time of need. And if we're not doing that as a society, if we're not creating the exemptions that were discussed here, and if we don't engage in that conversation and respect, we're losing the moment. And it is so tempting. It is so tempting to be divided among the stuff, which is why I think it's especially important for people to live their conscience individually. And the incentives were wonderful. You got lottery tickets, you got beer, you got $100 to get vaccinated. Throw the incentives out, sure, but let people live their conscience to the best of their ability, and I would consider it my job to protect that right.
Very good. Thank you. And a very good question. And that's one of the points that how do you take where the common good for society balances with somebody's individual right. And I know that was the mandate. A lot of questions, even the universities would say, you know, where is the balance there? And I think even as a minister, a pastor of a church, you know, for me, it was always the safety of my congregation was the priority. So we would follow some of the mandates, but coming from a predominantly African-American community, it was a big struggle. I never could understand why the Civil War ever happened until I saw COVID and saw families literally split down the middle and stop talking to each other because one was pro and the other was against, and just how violent people could get, and that's serious there. So that concludes our panel for this afternoon and this American experiment. I'll let you go make one comment, and then Steve, I'm gonna let you come on up and wrap up.
I just want to make one comment. You can see how the First Amendment is now affecting the military. If you know our regulation, everybody in the military, before we always had to worry about whether our hair was coming out or our caps.
Yeah.
So now there's a whole big section on religious artifacts, religious wearing, and everything. And they have pictures in it now. So it's a whole new game because the numbers are changing, because now a lot of Muslims are coming and other religions are coming in. So now the changes are with the First Amendment. From the hair, you can wear your signet, your religious signets, the attire, and everything. So it's changing, but it's coming at the time where people dictates it and where the situation and times are making those changes. So if anybody go in, depending on your religion, or what you have to wear for that religion that you want to be in, and before they, Miller say, if you want it, I give it to you. We heard that in the military. If you want that, we give it to you. But now the times is changing. The numbers of different religious organizations are coming in. So now it's accommodating and make people freely come into the military. And that's one aspect with Muslim and Islam.
Great, thank you. I think at the end of the day, Dr. Walker has it right. Let's just start training all the 8-year-olds. Steve, come on up. Thank you very much, everyone.